common to recall unremarkable comments made from nearly 30 years ago. But something a fellow pastor said to me that far back has stayed with me all these years. The pastor was about 15 years older than I was and had been kind to me and was offering himself as something of a mentor to me, but I found his comment troubling. Like I did, he served a two-point charge. That is, he had two churches he served at the same time. He was happy with his relationship with the larger of the two churches inside of the town where he lived. They were more professional people in his congregation there, and he felt they treated him with the sort of respect he deserved. But at the smaller congregation that was out in the country, he had a more troublesome relationship. Apparently, this little country church had a hard time paying its bills, and so one of the ways they dealt with this problem was by holding dinners every month to raise funds. And he didn't have a whole lot of interest in those dinners. The comment that he made to me with obvious anger in his voice was this: "They want me to stand around at these dinners and serve coffee. I didn't go to 4 years of college and 3 years of seminary just to stand around and serve coffee." I saw the expectation as being demeaning to him, expressing a lack of appreciation and respect on the part of the parishioners for his status as a professional and the knowledge he worked so hard to achieve. And from the perspective of the world, he certainly had a point. I mean, you put in all that time in school precisely so that you don't have to do all that menial work, right? Nobody asks lawyers or doctors to serve coffee, do they? The problem, of course, is this peculiar vocation that he and I have chosen. Yes, we have spent all those years in higher education, but ultimately the purpose of that education was to get a clearer handle on who Jesus the Messiah truly is. And his way was that of a servant, somebody who washes feet and, if necessary, serves coffee. Now, I assure you, I have my own forms of arrogance and pride that I grapple with. If you don't believe that, you can speak to my family. And usually it's easier to see such things in others than it is in yourself. Nonetheless, it seemed clear to me that at that time that my colleague's comment was suggesting a direction in ministry I shouldn't try to follow. It is in this spirit that I have always made it a point in worship, when I'm not actually leading worship, to sit in the pews with the rest of the congregation, and especially not to sit in thrones like that one. In most churches, the pastor or the priest sits on this elevated plane up on the altar area, suggesting that he or she is on some higher plane of existence, but the truth is we're all in this together. This is, as I said, the way of Jesus, which he called his disciples to follow, and it is a way that the disciples found very hard to grasp. You see it in this morning's gospel lesson. In the passage immediately before us, as Bob told us, Peter has come up with the right answer to the question Jesus asked: "Who do you say that I am?" He's answered, "You're the Messiah." It's the right answer, but strangely Jesus tells them not to tell anyone yet. The reason is that what Jesus was about as the Messiah was nothing like what everybody else thought the Messiah should be about. And he didn't want to get confusion going. Everybody else thought it was about coming with power and glory to set everything straight and to bark much orders that would bring in the kingdom. But as the conversation continued, the part we heard today, Jesus starts talking about the central part of his mission as the Messiah is to go to Jerusalem, where he will suffer and die at the hands of the religious authorities. And Peter tries to set him straight. He takes him aside and rebukes Jesus, telling Jesus he doesn't have to suffer and die. And then Jesus explodes. He rebukes Peter in the presence of the other disciples, calling him nothing less than Satan the tempter. He says Peter has in mind the way of people, the concerns of people, not that of God. The way of people is to rise above other humans, to accumulate more status and money and power and comforts for oneself. It's to try and rise above the human condition, to be special, not like others. It's descending, it's rising above everything. And we see the opposite in Jesus. He's about descending into the muck. We see this in Jesus if we're paying attention. He is born into a homeless family in the midst of violence. At John's baptism, he enters into the waters as if he were just another slob trying to find his way home on the bus. And that is the moment, if you'll recall, the precise moment when God says, "You are my beloved Son, with whom I'm well pleased." God is pleased with the direction he's taking. He then went out into the wilderness so that he would suffer temptation and hunger just like every other human being. And now he tells the disciples that he will suffer being misunderstood and abandoned and even death itself, just like every other human being experiences in the course of his life. But Peter wants his Messiah to stay up there on a pedestal. You're above all this, Jesus. You're God's special child. You've got status. You don't have to serve coffee at church dinners. But that's the human way disguised as God's way. God's way is to enter into the muck with the rest of us. Peter says what he says because he cares about Jesus, but there's more to it than that. He wants to be exempted from having to enter into all that stuff himself. It's not hard to see that if the Messiah is following such a path into suffering and death, then the rest of them will be as well. As Jesus said, if you want to follow me, then you're going to have to pick up your own cross and come after me. And there's something really ironic here. The strongest rebuke that Jesus ever makes to an individual person in all of the Gospels, it's not to the scribes and the Pharisees. It comes to Peter when he calls him Satan. It's given to the man who's destined to be the first pope, the first clergy person. And something powerful is being said there to remind us in the church. It points out the fact that the church will always be tempted to get this wrong, to go at things the way of the world rather than God's way. In Mark's Gospel, there will be 2 more times that Jesus will tell his disciples that he must suffer and die. On both occasions, the disciples make it clear that they just don't get it, don't want to get it. Right after the second time it comes up, Mark tells us that the disciples engage in this argument regarding which of them is the greatest. And Jesus tries to straighten them out by telling them that he places a child in their midst, the one of the lowest status in that culture, and says, if you want to serve me, you serve this child. You welcome this child and you welcome me. The third time Jesus brings this up, the suffering and death business, James and John show that they can't take it in by coming and asking for special status in the kingdom that they're still expecting to be established when they get to Jerusalem. They want to sit at his right and left hand. The way of Jesus isn't the way of the world, and it can't. And it can take a lifetime to get that. Now, in Mark's day, taking up the cross and following Jesus could easily have meant getting nailed yourself to a cross, just like Jesus, because the Emperor Nero was in power and he was killing as many Christians as he could get his hands on. There's a Christian in Iran right now who could die for his faith, but that's not likely to happen to us. So what does a cross life look like for us? What does it mean to take up our cross? Well, first of all, it means reminding ourselves and one another every day that we're all in this thing called life together with every other single person on the face of this planet. We are no better than anyone else, and it means giving up patronizing postures and tones. It can be hard to do. When we see